You signed it, Elena. You just don't remember because the army has filled your head with nonsense. My father said it loudly enough for everyone in the Montgomery County courtroom to hear, then leaned back beside his attorney. With the satisfied little smile he had worn my entire childhood whenever he believed he had reduced me to something small. She moves boxes for a living, Your Honor. She isn't a lawyer. She doesn't understand these documents. I was 32 years old, an army captain, and I had spent the previous 9 months coordinating equipment, personnel, and multi-million-dollar inventories across 3 countries. But to my father, I was still the stubborn girl who had embarrassed him by leaving Tennessee instead of spending my life asking permission. His lawyer pushed a notarized power of attorney toward the judge and said the signature proved I had voluntarily given my father authority to refinance my duplex while I was overseas. That single document had already been used to pull $318,000 against a property I had bought with my own money, destroy my credit, and put my home 3 missed payments away from foreclosure. My older sister Sophia sat behind him, staring at her hands. Dad had been paying her mortgage and her daughter's college tuition for years, and I knew exactly why she would not look at me. My attorney, Rebecca Lane, did not argue. She simply asked, "Mr. Ramirez, one more time for the record. You personally watched your daughter sign this document in your office on April 6th? Dad rolled his eyes. Yes. 2:40 in the afternoon. She complained the whole time, but she signed it right there. Rebecca looked at me once, then opened the exhibit binder we had spent 4 months building. Your Honor, may I direct the court to Exhibit 14? The judge turned 3 pages, stopped, and slowly raised her eyes. Dad was still smiling. His attorney was still rearranging his yellow legal pad like this was going exactly according to plan. The judge looked back at the power of attorney, then at the certified Army movement record, then at the airline manifest, and finally at my father. Her voice changed. Mr. Ramirez, are you absolutely certain you saw your daughter in Clarksville, Tennessee at 2:40 p.m. on April 6th? Dad's smile tightened. I just told you I did. The judge tapped the page with one finger. Then perhaps you can explain how Captain Elena Ramirez was simultaneously signed through the security gate at a United States installation in Poland, more than 4,000 miles away, 37 minutes before you claim she was sitting in your office. My father's attorney stopped moving. Sophia looked up. I did not smile, because the document in front of the judge was only the beginning. Dad had spent my entire life assuming silence meant surrender. He was about to learn why I had stayed quiet for 4 months. To understand why my own father would risk prison to take a duplex from his daughter, you have to understand what leaving meant in my family. My mother died when I was 14, and after that my father, Victor Ramirez, turned our house into a place where love was measured by obedience. He owned a small equipment rental business outside Clarksville, the kind of place contractors came for trenchers, compact loaders, generators, and battered trailers that always smelled like diesel and wet dirt. Before Mom died, Dad could be demanding, but she had a way of pushing back when he crossed a line. After she was gone, nobody did. Sophia was 3 years older than me and understood the new rules faster. She stayed close, agreed with him, worked Saturdays at the rental counter, dated boys he approved of, and let him choose the community college she attended. He rewarded compliance generously. At 17, she got a used Mustang with a red ribbon tied around the steering wheel. At 17, I got a spreadsheet showing every expense he claimed I had created during the previous year. School uniforms, dental copay, gas to drive me to track practice, my share of groceries. He did not actually make me pay all of it, which somehow made the ritual worse, because the point was never the money. The point was to remind me I was a cost. Whenever I disagreed with him, he would tap the printed total and say, "You have no idea what it takes to carry this family." Sophia learned to keep him happy. I learned to keep records. By 16, I had a shoebox under my bed, filled with pay stubs from the diner where I worked evenings, bank receipts, school forms, anything with my name and a date on it. I did not know why I kept everything. I just knew that facts felt safer than conversations in our house. The year I graduated high school, I told Dad I had accepted an ROTC scholarship. He stared at me across the kitchen table, as if I had announced I was changing my last name. "You're leaving to play soldier?" he asked. I told him I wanted to serve and study logistics. He laughed so hard he actually wiped his eyes. "Logistics? That's a fancy word for moving boxes. Sophia looked down at her plate. I remember that more clearly than the insult. She always looked down. At my commissioning 4 years later, Dad arrived 20 minutes late, shook hands with two strangers, posed for a photograph so he could put it on Facebook, and left before the reception because a customer needed a trailer. When I made first lieutenant, he said nothing. When I deployed for the first time, he texted, "Don't expect me to run your errands while you're gone." When I made captain, he sent me a thumbs-up emoji 3 days later because Sophia had reminded him. I eventually stopped giving him information about my career because every achievement became another opportunity for him to explain why it was unimpressive. That should have created distance. Instead, I made the mistake so many daughters make when they have spent their lives trying to prove they are not ungrateful. I kept helping. When Dad's business hit a bad year and he needed somewhere cheaper to live, I offered him the downstairs unit of the duplex I had bought near Clarksville after my second assignment. I had saved for years, used my housing allowance carefully, and bought the place because I wanted one thing in my life that nobody else had chosen for me. I lived upstairs when I was stationed nearby and rented it when I was gone. Dad moved into the lower unit for 6 months. Sophia and her daughter later moved into the upstairs unit after her divorce. I charged neither of them market rent. Dad paid utilities. Sophia covered half the property taxes when she could. For 5 years, the arrangement limped along, and every Thanksgiving, Dad told relatives he had kept the family property together, as if the deed did not have my name on it. I corrected him twice. Both times he laughed and said, "Paperwork doesn't make a family." I should have heard the warning in that sentence. The first sign that something had changed came while I was in Poland during a multinational training rotation. It was 5:18 in the morning, cold enough that the metal steps outside our temporary operations building burned through my gloves when my phone buzzed with a credit monitoring alert. A new mortgage account had appeared under my name. Original balance, $318,000. I stared at the screen for a full minute because I assumed it had to be a mistake. I already had a mortgage on the duplex, and its balance was nowhere near that number. I called the lender when the East Coast opened. The woman on the phone asked me to verify my mailing address, then said, "Ma'am, this was a cash-out refinance completed in April." I told her I had been outside the United States since February. She became careful after that. I asked for copies of everything. She would not send the full loan file without identity verification, but by that evening I had enough to understand the outline. Somebody had presented a durable power of attorney supposedly signed by me, authorizing my father to act on my behalf regarding the duplex. Using that document, Dad had refinanced the property, paid off my existing mortgage, and taken more than $200,000 in cash proceeds. The loan was still legally attached to my property, and payments had already begun arriving late. When I called Dad, I made myself sound confused instead of furious. "What happened with the mortgage?" I asked. He did not even hesitate. "I handled it." "Handled what?" "The house. We talked about this." "We had not." "Dad, what did you sign?" He sighed the way he used to sigh when I asked for help with algebra. "Elena, you gave me authority before you left. I refinanced so we could repair the roof and put money into the business. It benefits everybody." I asked how much went into repairs. He said he was busy and hung up. I did not call back. I did what my audience of one had trained me to do since I was 16. I started a file. I downloaded every bank statement I could access. I emailed the lender's fraud department. I notified my chain of command, because the delinquent account had already appeared on a routine financial review connected to my security eligibility, and I did not want anyone hearing a distorted version before they heard mine. My commander did not suspend me, handcuff me, or dramatize it. He simply told me to document the dispute and keep the security manager updated. That quiet professionalism mattered more than Dad would ever understand. For once, an accusation did not automatically become truth just because someone said it confidently. Over the next 3 weeks, records began arriving. The power of attorney was dated April 6th and notarized by a woman named Denise Carver, who had worked in Dad's rental office for 11 years. The signature looked good at first glance. It looked good because it had been copied from a lease renewal I had signed 4 years earlier. I knew the exact document the moment I saw the unusual curl at the end of the R in Ramirez. I also noticed something else. The notary acknowledgement stated that I had personally appeared before Denise in Clarksville at 2:40 p.m. on April 6th. At 2:40 p.m., Tennessee time, I had been in Poland for nearly 7 weeks. I had a military passport entry, airline records, orders, lodging records, daily duty rosters, and secure installation access logs that placed me there. Still, I did not call Dad and tell him I had caught him. I called a civilian attorney in Tennessee. Rebecca Lane practiced real estate litigation and financial fraud. During our first video meeting, she listened without interrupting, then said, "Do not threaten him. Do not accuse the notary, and do not tell anyone what evidence you have. We need originals, subpoenas, and a clean timeline." That sentence changed the way I approached everything. For years, I had wanted Dad to admit what he had done to me. Rebecca made me understand that admission was not necessary. Evidence was. By the time I returned to Tennessee 4 months later, the duplex no longer felt like home. Dad had installed a new brass lock on the downstairs door and parked a black SUV where my old truck used to sit. Sophia had replaced the porch furniture. There was a laminated notice taped beside the mailbox instructing all tenants to deliver payments to Ramirez Family Management, a company I had never heard of. I stood on the sidewalk reading my own address beneath a business name my father had apparently created while I was overseas. Then Sophia opened the upstairs door. For a second, we just stared at each other. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "You shouldn't be here without telling Dad," she said. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "Do you know about the refinance?" Her face answered before her mouth did. "He said you approved it." "Did you see me approve it?" She folded her arms. "He said you signed something before you left." "Did you see me sign it?" She looked toward the lower unit. "Elena, please. He's been helping me. After the divorce, I had nothing. He paid the mortgage on my old place until it sold. He's covering Maya's first year at Vanderbilt. I can't just start a war." That was the first moment I saw Sophia clearly. As children, I had believed Dad loved her more. As an adult, I realized he had simply found a different way to control her. I had been punished for resistance. She had been rewarded for dependence. The result was the same. Both of us organized our lives around his approval. I told her, "I'm not asking you to start a war. I'm asking whether you know the truth." She whispered, "I know he needed money." Then the downstairs door opened, and Dad stepped onto the porch. He had aged since I last saw him, but the look on his face was unchanged. "There she is," he said. "Captain Cardboard Box." I felt something inside me go still. He walked down the steps and held out a folder. "Sign this and we can end the nonsense." It was a settlement agreement. I would accept responsibility for the refinance, release him from claims, and sell the duplex to his new family company for the amount remaining on the loan. In return, he would forgive a $42,000 debt he claimed I owed him for improvements he had made over 5 years. I flipped through 3 pages. New gutters, HVAC repairs, fence replacement, landscaping. I had paid for half of them myself. "You kept receipts?" I asked. He smiled. "Unlike you, I understand business." I handed the folder back. "Then court should be easy for you." His smile vanished. "Don't get cute. You're 32 years old and still working for the government. I built things. You shuffle inventory reports. I know contracts better than you ever will." Sophia said, "Dad, stop." He ignored her. "If you fight me, that loan stays on your credit. You know what financial problems do to people with clearances. Maybe your army friends won't think Captain Ramirez is so impressive when they realize she can't even manage her own house." That was when I understood the refinance had never been just about cash. He knew enough about my career to know unexplained debt could create problems, and he was counting on that pressure to make me settle. I looked at him and said, "Send everything through Rebecca. Nothing else. No accusation, no threat, no emotional explosion he could repeat later." I walked to my rental car and drove away. That evening, Sophia called me from a grocery store parking lot because she did not want Dad to hear. She was crying. "He made me sign something too," she said. Dad had used her as a witness on a written statement claiming I had discussed the power of attorney at a Christmas dinner months earlier. In exchange, he had promised to keep paying Maya's tuition. Sophia admitted she had signed it without reading the final version. Then she said something that made Rebecca sit forward when I repeated it the next morning. 2 days before I left for Poland, Dad had asked Sophia to bring him a folder from my upstairs desk because he needed an old signature sample for insurance paperwork. She had done it. She remembered the document because it had a blue tab from the property manager. My old lease renewal. Rebecca subpoenaed the lender's closing file, Denise Carver's notary journal, Dad's business bank records, and the records of the title company that processed the refinance. What emerged was uglier and simpler than any conspiracy I could have imagined. Dad's equipment rental business had been collapsing for nearly a year. 2 major contractors stopped using him. He owed payroll taxes. He had personally guaranteed a line of credit. Instead of telling Sophia or me, he decided my equity was a family resource he had a right to use. He created the power of attorney, copied my signature, and persuaded Denise to notarize it after telling her I had signed while home on leave. Denise did not record the notarization in her journal on April 6th. In fact, there was a 3-day blank space around that date. When subpoenaed, she hired her own lawyer. The lender's file also contained a photocopy of my driver's license that Dad had kept from a truck rental years earlier, along with a phone number that was not mine. The number belonged to a prepaid cell phone purchased with Dad's business debit card. Then there was the money. Of the cash taken from the refinance, less than $12,000 went to the duplex. Most went to Dad's business creditors, tax arrears, and a new operating account. Nearly $30,000 went toward Sophia's expenses, including Maya's tuition deposit. When Rebecca showed me that line, I felt anger rise and then disappear. Sophia had not known where the money came from. Dad had turned stolen equity into another chain around her ankle. Rebecca asked if I wanted Sophia's statement withdrawn immediately. I said no. Give her the choice, I told her. I'm done making decisions for people because I think I know what's best for them. That's his habit, not mine. 2 weeks before the hearing, Sophia came to Rebecca's office alone. She corrected her statement, disclosed the signature sample incident, and agreed to testify truthfully if called. Dad responded by cutting off Maya's tuition payment that same afternoon. Sophia called me from her car and said, "He told me I chose you over my own daughter." I asked what Maya had said. Sophia laughed through tears. She said she'd rather take loans than watch me lie for Grandpa. That was the moment Sophia began leaving him. Not physically yet, but mentally. She opened a bank account Dad could not access. She started applying for jobs. She gave Rebecca every text Dad had sent about the case, including one where he wrote, "Elena will fold when the army starts asking questions. She always acts tough until money gets involved." I read that message 3 times. The thing that hurt was not that he wanted me to fold. It was that after 32 years, he still believed every choice I made was an act performed for him. The hearing began on a gray Tuesday morning in November. There was no dramatic federal seal, no secret file, and no moment where I marched to the bench with evidence nobody had seen. Rebecca had filed our exhibits correctly. Dad's attorney had copies. The lender had separate counsel because it wanted the fraud resolved as much as I did. Denise Carver appeared under subpoena with her lawyer. Dad arrived in a navy suit and acted as though the entire proceeding was a misunderstanding created by an emotional daughter. His lawyer's strategy was simple. Elena signed the power of attorney before leaving, later regretted letting her father use the equity, and was now exploiting military records to escape a financial decision. Dad testified first. He was good. I have to give him that. He had spent his whole life learning how to sound reasonable while saying things that were not. He described raising 2 girls alone after tragedy. He described helping me through school, supporting my military career, maintaining the duplex while I traveled, and protecting the family from my impulsive financial decisions. Then Rebecca asked about April 6th. Where was Captain Ramirez when she signed the power of attorney? My office. Who was present? Me, Elena, and Denise. How long was she there? 20 minutes, maybe 30. Did you physically see her sign? Dad looked directly at me before answering. Yes. Rebecca asked him to be specific. He became irritated, which was exactly what she wanted. He said I sat at the conference table, complained about being in a hurry, signed with a black pen, then left because I had to return to base. And you are certain this happened April 6th? She asked. Dad scoffed. I remember because I had payroll that afternoon. That was when Rebecca asked the judge to review Exhibit 14. The certified movement records showed I had departed the United States in February. Airline records showed no return trip. Installation entry records in Poland showed my credential used at 8:03 p.m. local time on April 6th. A training accountability report signed by another officer placed me at an evening logistics briefing. Dad's attorney objected to the way Rebecca characterized the records, but not their authenticity. Those issues had already been handled before the hearing. The judge asked Dad the question again. He doubled down. He said military records could be wrong. Rebecca then called Denise. She looked like she had not slept in days. She admitted I had never appeared before her on April 6th. She admitted Dad had brought the document already signed and told her I had executed it before departing. She said she trusted him because she had worked for him 11 years. Did you actually witness Captain Ramirez sign? Rebecca asked. No. Did you speak to her by phone or video? No. Did you verify with Captain Ramirez that she authorized you to notarize the signature? Denise whispered. No. Dad's face changed for the first time. Not fear yet. Anger. His attorney leaned toward him and spoke quietly, but Dad pushed his chair back and said, "She's lying to save herself." The judge told him to remain quiet. Rebecca then introduced the photocopied lease renewal and placed it beside the alleged power of attorney. A forensic document examiner had concluded that the disputed signature was not naturally written on the new document. It matched the older signature with characteristics consistent with reproduction. Then came the prepaid phone. Then the business bank records. Then the payments. The story Dad had spent months constructing collapsed, not because I outranked him, not because the judge discovered I was more important than he thought, but because every lie required another record to disappear, and records had been the one thing I trusted since I was 16. Dad's attorney asked for a recess. When we returned, he looked 10 years older. He told the court his client wished to withdraw several factual assertions, but Dad interrupted him. No, I don't. The judge stared at him. Dad pointed toward me. She knew I was trying to save the business. She knew that property was supposed to stay in the family. I heard Sophia inhale behind me. Rebecca did not say anything. The judge asked, Mr. Ramirez, whose name was on the title before the disputed power of attorney? Dad answered, hers, technically. Who purchased the property? She did, but I maintained it. Did Captain Ramirez give you written permission to borrow against it? He paused. She gave me permission in principle. Is that a yes or a no? His jaw worked. She owed this family. There it was. Not a legal argument. The truth. I owed this family. I owed him for feeding me as a child, for giving me a last name, for letting me live under his roof after my mother died, for every sacrifice he had counted and recounted until fatherhood became an invoice I could never fully pay. The judge said, that was not my question. Dad looked at me and something in him cracked. You think that uniform makes you better than us? You disappear for months, come home with medals nobody understands, and suddenly the house is yours. The decisions are yours. Everything is yours. Sophia stayed. I stayed. We are the ones who kept things together. I stood there listening and finally understood the motive that had confused me since childhood. Dad did not hate me because I was weak. He hated the part of me he could not control. Every promotion, every assignment, every apartment, every dollar I earned without him was evidence that I could build a life outside his authority. Sophia's dependence made him feel necessary. My independence made him feel abandoned. He had spent years calling that abandonment ingratitude because it sounded better than fear. The judge ruled the power of attorney invalid, found that the refinance had been obtained through fraud, and entered temporary orders protecting the property while the lender unwound the transaction and pursued its remedies. She referred the forged notarization and related conduct to the district attorney's office and the appropriate state regulatory authorities. She did not pound the bench or announce anyone was going to prison. Real consequences are quieter than television. They arrive as findings, referrals, frozen accounts, lawyers suddenly careful with their words, and people who were arrogant in the morning avoiding cameras by afternoon. Dad turned toward me when it was over and said, "You're really going to let them ruin me over a house?" I looked at him and said, "No, Dad. You did all of this over a house that was never yours." He shook his head. "After everything I did for you." I almost answered the way the 14-year-old version of me would have, listing every injury, every insult, every Christmas spreadsheet, every milestone he ignored. Instead, I said, "Being my father never gave you permission to sign my name." Then I walked out with Sophia beside me. 3 months later, the duplex was quiet again. The fraudulent refinance had been rescinded after the lender completed its investigation and reached agreements through counsel. My original mortgage was restored under terms Rebecca had negotiated, my credit reports were being corrected, and my security review had closed without action once I provided the documentation showing identity and loan fraud. Dad's equipment business entered bankruptcy. Denise surrendered her notary commission and cooperated with investigators. The criminal side moved at its own pace, without my control and without my interference. That was important to me. I had spent my whole life with a man who believed control and love were the same thing, and I refused to become him simply because I finally had leverage. Sophia got a job managing the front office of a dental practice. It was not glamorous, but the first time she received a paycheck deposited into an account Dad had never touched, she sent me a screenshot with one sentence: "I didn't know money could feel this quiet." Maya stayed in school using scholarships, part-time work, and loans she had chosen herself. Sophia and I were not suddenly perfect sisters. Too much had happened for that. We talked slowly. We apologized specifically. She told me she was sorry for signing Dad's statement because she had been afraid of losing financial support. I told her I was sorry for spending years treating her as if being favored meant she had been free. One evening we sat on the duplex porch drinking coffee while workers replaced the brass lock Dad had installed. Sophia asked, "Do you think he ever loved us?" I watched the locksmith turn the cylinder in his hand. "I think he loved being needed," I said. Maybe he never learned the difference. Dad texted me twice during those months. The first message said, "I hope you're happy." I did not answer. The second arrived on my 33rd birthday. "I still don't understand why you took this so far." I stared at it for a long time, then typed, "Because you signed my name, threatened my career, and asked my sister to lie. If you ever want a relationship with me again, start by telling the truth about those 3 things." He never responded. For the first time in my life, his silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like space. A week later, I returned to my unit. On Monday morning, I stood in front of 23 soldiers while we reviewed an equipment movement plan for an upcoming rotation. One young specialist stayed after everyone else left. She looked embarrassed and said, "Ma'am, can I ask you something that isn't about work?" I told her, "Yes." She said her mother kept taking money from her account and telling her that good daughters helped family without asking questions. She wanted to know whether setting limits made her selfish. I thought about grocery spreadsheets, Sophia's lowered eyes, the forged signature, and the courtroom where my father finally had to answer questions he could not control. Then I told her the thing I wish someone had told me when I was 19. Helping family is a choice. Love doesn't require you to surrender your name, your money, or your future. Respect goes both ways. She nodded slowly. After she left, I looked around my office at the shipping schedules, maintenance reports, inventory sheets, and all the boring paperwork Dad had mocked for years. He had been right about one thing. I did move boxes for a living. I moved food, medical equipment, vehicles, repair parts, and everything soldiers needed to do their jobs safely. I tracked every item because missing details mattered, dates mattered, signatures mattered. Chains of custody mattered. My father had spent years calling that work insignificant, and in the end, it was the habit that saved me. Not rank, not a secret title, not somebody powerful recognizing me. I saved myself because when a man who had underestimated me forged one piece of paper, I knew enough to keep every piece